wash him clean of any residue. Only once he was on the plane the following day did John allow himself a thought about it and acknowledge the tremble in his hands. But he would work that out in time, something he had plenty of now. The next one is called Stalker. Johnson shifted his position slightly and found the window he was looking for. He fiddled with the focus on the binoculars and someone came into view. It wasn't her. He sighed. Was she home? He thought she was. He'd seen the limo turn up and a group of glitter-clad individuals rush into the house. He assumed she was among them. Maybe he was wrong. He scanned the top floor windows. Lights were coming on and people were running about. Couples were pairing off and he wanted to know who she would be with. Movement in another window caught his attention, and there she was, head thrown back, laughing at the guy in front of her. He looked like a typical new romance geek, silver shoulder pads making him look like something out of a badly made sci-fi movie, hair lacquered into an elaborate quiff. The guy was lighting a cigarette. If he wasn't careful, his hair would catch light. Johnson smiled. He'd like to see that. They were drunk, swaying all over the place, and he was waiting to see if they were going to get undressed, but no such luck as they exited the room. He pulled up, taking his weight off his elbow. Watching that guy light up had made him want a cigarette too. He pulled a packet out of his jeans and enjoyed a smoke here on top of the world. Johnson surveyed the city below him as it glistened in the nightlight. He'd been scoping this location out the last couple of days, making sure it overlooked the right house. He'd wanted her ever since he'd first seen her in her debut music video. It wasn't as though he wasn't someone worthy of knowing. He owned a music production company, but it wasn't a big enough concern for her to notice. He'd found out all he could about her, and even though he could access the parties she attended, her group of sycophantic security guards wouldn't let him close. He knew he'd dipped into the obsessive when he woke up every morning thinking about her and fell asleep every night with her image in his head. He'd started to resent her, and that's when he'd come up with his plan. Johnson ground the butt into the dusty soil and flicked it away, spinning back round onto his belly. Looking through the binoculars again, he found her downstairs in the lounge, moments before the French windows burst open and they all came flooding out. Even from this distance, he could hear their screams of laughter and knew what they were planning. He reached out and grabbed the holdall he had with him and scrabbled about inside with one hand. He didn't want to miss this opportunity. He saw her come out, already stripping off her clothes, revealing a string bikini beneath. It reflected gold in the light round the pool. He paused as his hand found what it was looking for and took in the view for a moment. He imagined his hands on that soft, supplicating flesh. It was such a waste. He took away the binoculars and replaced them with the sight of the rifle. He found his target easily and flicked the safety off in one movement. He took a breath and waited a second as he saw her approach the diving board. She jumped once, then twice, and on the third he pulled the trigger. It hit home, making the dive less elegant, but the crowd round the pool loved it, cheering and thinking it was just the drink. Johnson smiled as he beat his retreat, knowing that in a few seconds those cheers would turn to cries as the blood surfaced and she didn't. He jogged down the top of the ridge, more sure-footed than he'd imagined, and jumped into his jeep. Being halfway up the hillside, he was able to coast the car down to the tarmac, keeping his retreat silent. If he couldn't have her, no one was going to. The next story is called Being Prepared. Paul laid the lace wedding dress out on the bed. It still looked as fresh and white as it had done that day. He could still see her in it. She'd wrapped it up so carefully in tissue paper, making sure there wouldn't be a wrinkle in it. He unfolded the sleeves, smoothing them out gently, and ran his fingers along the edge of the shoulderless sleeves, and then along the sweetheart neckline of the bodice. He loved the sensation of it, and remembered how it had felt under him that night when they'd returned to their hotel room to consummate their vows. She had talked about how she had wanted her daughter to wear it on her wedding day, and how she wouldn't mind if it had to be altered a little. But there had been no daughter or son, so the dress had remained untouched. Paul was secretly pleased. He wouldn't have wanted to see any other woman in it. It would have detracted from the sweet memories it held. And he needed those memories to hold on to now. He had to try and salvage something from the ensuing years of pain. He turned the dress over, being careful not to crease it, and started to undo the tiny buttons that ran down the back. One by one it opened, and he smiled Pushing harder, it wouldn't be long now. He toppled over when it gave, the sharp movement